Would you join an organization that lies to you, physically and emotionally abuses you, and takes away your money, self-respect, and maybe even your wife and daughters?
What he was looking for, he got. He got my daughter.
He'll put you down. He'll do everything he can and humiliate you, and then you crawl back on your knees. I'm sorry, you know, and he says, okay.
There are physical beatings for things as small as an attitude. In fact, one man tried to talk to his wife when he should have written her a note, and he was beaten for that.
They had said that I had lost my mind and that I was very dull-witted now because of my questioning the prophet, and that I'd given Satan a foothold and I'd never be normal.
Today on Day of Discovery, we'll talk to former members, and we're also offering a free booklet titled, How to Identify a Dangerous Religious Group. For your free booklet, simply call or write. Both the address and the phone number will be given at the end of the program. Dangerous religious groups are as old as religion itself. We're in Israel, at a place called En-Gedi. En-Gedi, which means spring of the mountain goat. The date palms and vineyards made this area in biblical times a symbol of beauty. En-Gedi is still a vivid slash of green on the barren coast of the Dead Sea. Was it a dangerous religious group that came to these cliffs overlooking the sky-blue water below, only a few miles south of Jericho? Well, it was here, at the spring of En-Gedi, in the Judean desert, that David, the shepherd destined to be king of Israel, hid from King Saul. David was not alone. Many came to join him, men that were distressed, inwardly troubled, men looking for structure, stability, and leadership.
The caves of En-Gedi tell us something about the kinds of individuals that join dangerous religious groups. From society's point of view, David and his band of troubled men would have looked dangerous. We read in the Old Testament, in 1 Samuel chapter 22, that in addition to some of David's own family that joined him there, the others who joined themselves to him were individuals who were described as being in distress or in debt or in some way discontented. And the text says he became their leader. Think about it. What a group. Here's a leader of individuals described as being in debt, distressed, or in some way discontented. I think it's easy, therefore, to see how society could have discounted David. Here was a man who was running from the government, surrounded by malcontents, definitely living on the fringe. And he was also an individual who claimed a spiritual relationship with God that would have given others reason to criticize him. I mean, this is the same young shepherd boy who had had the audacity to step in front of the seasoned armies of Israel to take on the giant of the Philistines in the name of his God. I believe that many members of what we today call dangerous religious groups could therefore identify with David and his band of disillusioned people. Many of the individuals that we today consider to be a part of dangerous religious groups can look at us, can look at society and the church around them and say, you think we're dangerous? No, you're dangerous. These individuals say, we're tired of hollow religion. These sometimes troubled, spiritually disappointed people look around themselves and see nothing but hypocrisy. They see a group of people in traditional churches who claim to follow God, but without a sense of sacrifice, without a sense of cost. And these are people who want something real. They want something they can give their life to, something more than what they see in the typical person of faith. And That's the kind of individual that we found when we recently talked to a number of individuals who've had personal experience with dangerous religious groups. We found normal, intelligent individuals who at one point or another in their life were looking for more than what they saw in the traditional church. It's also true that there were people who were going through problems, the kinds of problems which made them spiritually and socially vulnerable.
Well, I was vulnerable in a lot of ways. My parents had gone through a divorce a few years before that. I hadn't adjusted well to it. I was in college and I had started to get my life together as far as more discipline on my own, because I knew if I was going to college I had to do something. I couldn't just fool around. My life was at stake, my history, my career and everything like that. So I was trying to get my life together, but I was still missing the spiritual side. I wasn't getting that from anywhere, and I was hungry and thirsty for it. And so when they came along, I just wanted it. You know, it was like muddy water in the desert. You know, it's water. You take it, take anything you can get.
In those days, I knew that what I was involved in was somewhat destructive, and I was looking for a way out. I was looking for answers, just about life in general, about beliefs. From that perspective, at that time in my life, with the needs that I had, and in the emotional level that I was at, this seemed to be the place to be. And I stayed with it, married the daughter of the leader, which in itself had its perks. For a while I had a very good position in the group. I had a level of power, which didn't deteriorate until later.
And as we continue to listen to these individuals who've been involved personally in dangerous religious groups, we're not just talking about someone out there. In fact, we might be talking about ourselves. We're talking about normal people who, like David's men, may be in debt, distressed, and with our share of complaints. We may also be able to identify with people who don't want to continue merely going through the motions and the formalities of life. I mean, here are people who are willing to give everything in exchange for a spiritual life that is real.
I think it started off with extreme idealism and a desire to serve God with everything that we had, and not just to become so involved in our careers that there wouldn't be anything left of us to give. And it started off that way, and it just increased over time. And we thought, okay, maybe this is the way that we could go, to give as much as we could. I think once control was fully exerted, we continued to believe that, but our idealism was twisted in such a way that we were actually under the control of a person and not necessarily giving anything to the Lord at all. It was a coercive system.
Well, at that time, though it was my father doing this, I had already gotten married and had a couple children, and he had come to California, and I decided I felt dead and stayed in my spiritual life with the Lord. And though I really felt like I had had a conversion and I really loved Christ and I wanted to serve Him more and not just be stuck in a rut, and I joined Him too. And my husband came along, my children. So for the next 10 years of my life, I followed my dad into what was to become a full-fledged cult.
So what is it then about these individuals who get drawn in by spiritual predators? Are they just gullible people who are getting what they deserve? Well, in so many cases, the evidence is to the contrary. There is evidence that many of those who fall into these groups are not only looking for a higher level of spirituality, but that they tend to be professional, upscale, and intelligent.
The common misconception is that you got involved in a cult because you were stupid. And anyone who says that has no idea of the ability of people like this to twist the truth. And you may have 90% truth, but it's the way it's applied, and it's a very subtle process that brings you to a point where you will accept that authority and accept the ideas and the concepts. You believe you're living an elite Christian life.
As intelligent as these individuals can be, the irony, according to expert and author Ruth Tucker, is that dangerous religious leaders are often looking for individuals who are intelligent enough to see the problems in society around them, but of such a spiritual vision and passion that they're willing to overlook some of the inconsistencies in the lives of their spiritual leaders.
Typically, the leader is looking for somebody who will not look closely at his or her personal life, will overlook a lot of things because God has made exceptions, perhaps, in this case. One case after another, we find leaders who are not good examples of Christian morality and Christian living. And that is what is so amazing, because the followers very often are looking for a spiritual, moral leader. And maybe early on they aren't aware of certain things that the leader's involved in, but as time progresses, they see these things, and yet they are so deeply involved and so loyal that they often simply overlook the sins of the leader.
I thought we were following Christ, and I thought we were going to win souls and witness for Christ, and now we're into religious prostitution, and then we were into selling his literature and his letters on the street, and it just became more and more away from the Bible. And then my marriage was destroyed, and so he did away with marriage, and we became all one wife. And I thought, boy, this is just getting more and more bizarre. And I felt very uncomfortable being pushed into all these different, all this promiscuity that we were getting involved in. I felt very uncomfortable with that. It just seemed like the reason I stayed so long is because every time I came to some kind of a real breaking point, or my dad would come out with some new revelation, I would think about it, and then I'd think, no, I can take this, I can accept it. Where else would I go? I need to stay. So my conscience would become a little more seared. Then the next time the doctrine would be a little more extreme, and I'd say, no, I can take this. And I just kept going like that.
I hope the painful stories and experiences of these individuals are helping you. I hope you're seeing how subtle the process and logic can be that is able to trap intelligent people who are looking not for less spirituality, but for more. I hope you're also realizing how given the right set of circumstances, any one of us could be vulnerable. Listen as author and researcher Ron Enroth summarizes the characteristics of these normal, intelligent people who join dangerous religious groups.
The typical kind of person who joins an extremist group is vulnerable for a number of reasons. First of all, obviously, they're on a spiritual search. They're really, sincerely searching for God. They're sincere. Secondly, I think they're vulnerable situationally, and by that I mean very often they're in some transition in life. For a young person, it may be between high school and college, between college and career. Many people have gone through a divorce. They're in some situation in their life in which things are changing, and these groups will move in and take advantage of that kind of human situation. And then I think thirdly, people are vulnerable emotionally. They're down, they're lonely, they're feeling that there's a void in their life. And some of these groups are very able, very capable of focusing on those very, very human needs. I think some people are more vulnerable than others. I think that young adults are especially open to the possibility of being taken in by these groups. We find many more young people than elderly people who are attracted to cult-like groups.
I didn't care about the Bible studies or the scripture lessons I was getting in church and Sunday school. I cared about the girls in the youth group. I was playing the Christian game. And so because of that, I never really grasped what Christianity was all about. And I was just kind of working my way through religion. Then when I was approached by my friends in this cult group with their total loving attitude, I fell for it big time. Because still at that time, I was not into understanding what God had to say. I was understanding my friends and that they accepted me.
Now, up to this point, we've been emphasizing over and over again that the kinds of individuals who get caught up in dangerous religious groups tend to be normal, intelligent, if somewhat troubled people. Now we want to take a look at the fact that what happens when they get drawn in is anything but normal. Let's take a look at some of the damage that occurs.
I think both of us contemplated suicide at different points as a means of escape from the pressures of just having to live with basically 18 to 20-hour days and no let up and constant guilt and constant fear of not living up to God's expectation, which was basically the leader's expectations of us. I think it was horrible. I know I had a real hard time when they separated us. I was ready to leave at that point, and unfortunately the situation wasn't such that I had any freedom to do so. The emotional and psychological bars were already set. So that was probably really hard. And then our kids. Our kids were not planned by us. That was dictated to us. So I know I find myself being very protective of my children now. But the aftermath of having to deal with what happened to the children, how we could allow that to happen to them, those have been some of the hardest issues after exiting. Not so much how we're going to make a living, but the internal guilt and pressure of what has happened.
And I still always had that relationship with the Lord, and I just kept praying and praying that God would just, and the living situation was just getting more and more terrible. The children that were in that environment were just so, just not my idea of children, how I want my children to grow up. And I just did not agree with the way they were being brought up. They just had no discipline, and they were just all very emotionally, just had emotional scars, just crying over it. Just 13-year-old children that had serious problems, and little children who were just running around mad, and I didn't want my children to turn out that way. And so then I just started really getting like, I started vocalizing and telling my husband, I don't want this life. I don't like the way you treat me. This isn't the way I want to live. And I just felt like I felt like I couldn't get out. And my father-in-law threatened me and told me, if you ever try to leave, I'm going to try to take your children away. And so then I was just like, I had no hope. I was like, I'm never getting out of this. I'm just going to have to live with this the rest of my life.
The damage to those who are snared is as bad as the original promise was good. Those whose trust has been betrayed end up feeling trapped and without options. But there's good news. And the good news is reflected in the individuals that we've been hearing from today. They got out. They found deliverance from the dangerous group that they were a part of. But what does it take to get out? What does it take to break free of the fear that to leave the group is to turn your back on God Himself?
When a person decides to leave one of these destructive religious groups, they often find it difficult. That may be surprising to the average person to hear that, but there are several reasons. One is they have been intimidated spiritually and psychologically to believe that this is the only place for them, that to leave this particular group would mean leaving God, leaving God's presence, literally. And that's a very powerful control mechanism, to think that if I should leave this group, my eternal destiny may be jeopardized. Another reason that people find it difficult to leave these groups is because they have a lot of friends that they have made in the groups, especially if they've been involved for a long period of time. And so they find it difficult to relinquish friendships. They find it difficult to venture into that larger world, because very often in these kinds of groups, it's a kind of encapsulated experience. You're in an environment in which you really are not in touch with the larger society. And so people are fearful of making that break because they're not sure whether or not they'll be able to make the transition to the larger society or the transition to another belief system. And then when people leave these groups, they experience very often fear, confusion, uncertainty about the future. They even have difficulty making decisions. Some of them who've been in communal religious groups find it difficult to adjust to ordinary life in the outside society.
When I left, I was in an emotional freefall because you've built a total new world with its own perception of reality. And it is vastly different from the way you normally look at things. That's a difficult transition to make because you don't really know where you're headed. You still don't know what's true and what isn't. And you don't have, for a short time, you don't have any reality to fall on. At that point, I didn't even know what to do with God.
And so there is good news. Those who have become involved and entrapped in dangerous religious groups can find their way out. And even more importantly, they can find their way not just to a sense of confusion and regret, but to a real faith, a healthy faith. So oftentimes when we talk about dangerous groups, there's a sense of cynicism that encroaches, that comes in, and the attitude is, well, if those kinds of wolves are out there, if there's that kind of danger, then we really can't afford to commit ourselves, either to God or to any group. That's not the truth. We just have to become very discerning, learning from those who have gotten involved, for in many ways they model the characteristics of spiritual need and desire for commitment that should be in all of us. But we also need to learn that what is important is that in expressing that deep need for commitment, that we join ourselves to the right leader. The right leader is the one who once walked the hills of this country, one who found a group of troubled, distressed, hurting individuals and called out to them saying, "Come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." That same teacher is now obviously the Lord of the heavens, for he died for our sins. He rose from the dead to prove that he is one individual who deserves every bit of trust, every bit of commitment that you and I could find in our hearts. There is one that can be trusted.
Come as you are, this very moment. Surrender your heart and all that you have to Him. Come as you are. Jesus is waiting. Come to Him just as you are. Is your life filled with despair? Have you cried till your tears fell like rain? And your heart, though broken, still longs for someone who'll care. There is one faithful and true through the night. Every time that you cried out in pain, He was there beside you, gently calling your this very moment, surrender your heart and all that you have to Him. Come as you are. Jesus is waiting. Come to Him just as you are. Come as you are. This very moment, surrender your heart and all that you have to Him. Come as you are. Jesus is waiting. Come to Him just as you are. Come to Him just as you
Well, I'd like to thank those who have been willing to share their painful stories with us. And I hope that what they've had to say has been of help to you, to help you personalize the danger of the spiritual predators who are all around us. It very well could be that you or someone you love is involved in a group that seems to have the kind of tendencies that we've been looking at. We just can't afford to be in the dark about this, and so we're offering you a free copy of a booklet that will take you in more depth into an understanding of dangerous religious groups. I hope that you'll take the time to write and ask for a free copy of the booklet, How to Identify a Dangerous Religious Group. And when you write, address your letter to
Day of Discovery, Grand Rapids, Michigan, 49555. Or in Canada, write to Day of Discovery, Box 1622, Windsor, Ontario, N9A6Z7. Or you can call long distance, 1-918-251-3400. Next week, Mart De Haan will expose the bait-and-switch tactics that dangerous religious groups use on their unsuspecting followers. So join us then for another Day of Discovery.